I mean, it's essentially been admitted that, the next president, who we know now will be Trump, is going to face some sort of U.S. government debt crisis. And of course, that debt crisis is the consequence of wildly irresponsible fiscal policy, right? And so what I am concerned about is that there will be no accountability for that. There is a plan to use things that were meant, or at least pitched, as destroying fiat and the debt-based monetary system, will be used instead to usher in a newer version of it that, as Mark pointed out earlier, it will likely be deflationary, but only because they've stolen all of the assets.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's victory is still being celebrated by supporters and woefully decried by opposers. While many believe Trump was the lesser of two evils, capable of bringing better economic reforms that will benefit the working class, many of his supporters see the former president as a savior who holds the solution to all of America's economic and socioeconomic challenges. Popular investigative journalist Whitney Webb is in the former category. She approves of some of Trump's messages and describes him as the lesser of two evils, but warns that Trump is not the messiah his supporters think he is. In a recent interview with TFTC, alongside journalist and editor-in-chief at Bitcoin Magazine Mark Goodwin, Whitney stresses the importance of dismissing the notion that Trump is the perfect solution to the United States' many problems. She urges that his picks and policies be properly scrutinized at all times and critically denounced when applicable. Not only will this help the president-elect surround himself with people who have the country's best interest at heart, but it will also keep him in check so he remains true to all his campaign promises. Whitney says this has become even more important than any other point in U.S. history because of the impending debt crisis. In her words, the next U.S. president is going to face some sort of U.S. government debt crisis, and the populace's approach to the administration's policies will help determine if their response will be beneficial to us or the global elite class and their endgame. Whitney also warns about plans to introduce a new monetary system based on nothing but debt and cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Stablecoins, which will be sold as digital dollars and controlled by powerful financial institutions like BlackRock and J.P. Morgan. We will present clips from Whitney Webb's interview. But before we do, please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notifications bell for more videos. We appreciate the support and hope you enjoy the video.
I just want to start off with saying that I definitely empathize with the view, just like I did in 2016 and other elections, that the Trump ticket was the lesser of two evils. But I think after the first Trump term and the precedent set by campaign rhetoric versus policy action in that first term, I've been really skeptical that that won't repeat itself, right? And so you're already seeing, since Trump was elected, sort of these, sort of signaling that, someone like Mike Pompeo or some figures that have neoconservative bents, like Marco Rubio's being considered for a cabinet position. Mike Pompeo's been fielded for Secretary of Defense. People that worked right under Pompeo or have been tapped to lead the transition team for the State Department, things of that nature. The apparent signaling and claims from people like Howard Lutnick, co-chair of the Trump transition team, that RFK isn't really going to have any role in any sort of HHS or HHS sub-agency. Are these the beginning signs of backpedaling? It's, I think it's fair to be skeptical and be vigilant. Particularly what I would warn against is the idea that now that the lesser of two evils has won, now is the time to sit back and just let things happen and not hold anyone's feet to the fire and not ensure accountability. Because I think that's, a recipe for disaster, frankly, when people are complacent and too trusting. Consistently, politicians abuse that. And there's a very long track record of that happening in American politics with both parties, right? And so what I would, and what I've been saying a lot since the election is that complacency and the efforts to manufacture it are dangerous, I would say. And what I'm concerned about is that the people that were most against a lot of these efforts to undermine our freedoms, a lot of them being on the right, for example, or people that were, dissidents of the COVID era and COVID era policies, and gun owners, for example, who obviously have a way to impact, the fate of the country if things were ever to get really, tyrannical. If they're overly trusting of the federal government, they're more likely to be, complacent, and sort of just sit back and not really do anything because they trust the person that is in power. And unfortunately, I think there's bipartisan agendas that even with in 2016, Republicans also sweep the legislature. They took the executive branch, but it didn't result in the populist platform that was necessarily promised. So I think, if people don't want to ensure that the country does go on a better track, there needs to be pushback, and people need to not just, sit back in their armchairs and trust the plan or what have you, and need to really ensure that, like I've said for a long time, since I get accused of not offering any solutions, I've said for a really long time and for many years on your show and other shows that I have long believed that change is going to come from the bottom up, not the top down, and that people need to really ensure and focus on their local communities, on local resilience, and on building out alternatives that can help us resist a lot of these technocratic, agendas that seek to micromanage and control, essentially every aspect of our lives.
Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are undoubtedly the greatest risk to our financial freedom and privacy. Yet, more than 90% of the world's governments, regardless of ideology or political leanings, are researching, developing, or forcing their citizens to embrace digital versions of their respective fiat currencies. In China, for example, the Chinese Communist Party is using the digital yuan to enforce strict policies, punishing erring citizens with an immediate suspension from the digital yuan system. Imagine being cut off completely from accessing your hard-earned money because the government decided you ought to be punished outside the courtroom. Experts like Whitney warn that this is the future for the United States and the rest of the Western world. Though the Federal Reserve says it is currently not developing a CBDC, Whitney warns that there are plans to make stablecoins like Tether, the digital dollar, controlled by the heads of financial institutions like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. These executives have always been a part of the public-private partnership that rules every sector of the global economy. Whitney fears that the invasion of our rights and freedom under this system will be even more sinister than what's happening in China. Let's get back to the video.
Well, one thing I want to bring up about, people like Gillibrand and Lummis is that they frame a lot, and especially Lummis, frames a lot of her crypto advocacy as necessary to ensure dollar hegemony, right? And so as I understand it, and a lot of, rhetoric I've heard in the Bitcoin space for years is that fiat is terrible. It's broken money. We need to move on from fiat. And so hearing things like that from Lummis, hearing Trump at the Bitcoin conference say, actually, the Bitcoin and the dollar are not competing. Bitcoin is going to strengthen the dollar and all of this stuff. I think it should be a harbinger for concern for people that don't want a debt-based monetary future. And unfortunately, it's essentially been admitted that, the next president, who we know now will be Trump, is going to face some sort of U.S. government debt crisis. And of course, that debt crisis is the consequence of wildly irresponsible fiscal policy, right? And so what I am concerned about is that there will be no accountability for that. There is a plan to use things that were meant, or at least pitched, as destroying fiat and the debt-based monetary system, will be used instead to usher in a newer version of it that, as Mark pointed out earlier, it will likely be deflationary, but only because they've stolen all of the assets and really most things of value. So at that point, they do want a deflationary system because they have hoarded all of the wealth, and they don't want their wealth to inflate away now that they hold almost all of the cards. Right. And so, what concerns me there then is the stable coin play, as we said it for, a long time, stable coins have the potential to be just as programmable and surveillable as a CBDC could be. And the Fed and the national security community, meaning, the CIA, among other agencies, have been very open that stable coins will ensure dollar hegemony. And you have, stable coins like Tether, for example, saying that we're a partner of U.S. dollar hegemony. And, Trump with the, his family's, stablecoin project having recently come out. It's about having globalizing
I don't think
the
that's going to
dollar.
get much adoption.
Well, no,
worldwide.
maybe not that necessarily, but it shows that the intent is to globalize the dollar and essentially use dollar stable coins, not that aren't necessarily directly issued by the U.S. government, but will be regulated by it, to become, essentially a de facto world currency. That's essentially the push. And, it's essentially been happening relatively quietly for some time in economies that are dramatically unstable and have been made unstable by entities like the IMF, for example, which, the U.S. military refers to the IMF as a financial weapon of military power of the United States government. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And so, and then Argentina, of course, a lot of people are using Tether because their local currency is no good. And that's happening in other places around the world that have also been subjected, to essentially financial warfare by these same predatory, again, debt slavery model based institutions. And so will this actually improve the situation? Will it prevent future irresponsible fiscal policy if this is what ultimately ends up happening? It will come down to people resisting that and saying, no, that's not okay.
Other experts like popular bullion dealer Andy Schechtman and trends forecaster Gerald Celente have warned that there are ongoing efforts to launch a dollar-based CBDC, which will then be used to censor, control, and punish Americans who dare to refuse the mainstream narrative. According to Whitney, the CBDC will not be controlled by the Federal Reserve or any other governmental agency, but by the global cabal that controls the banking sector. If all of these things happen, the world is going to become a dystopian nightmare, particularly for people who dare to question the narrative. This is why we must resist now, before it becomes much too late, by educating others about what's coming and ensuring that our communities are united against these evil plans. Only with a united voice can we begin to reject this dystopic new world order. Please share your thoughts on Whitney's video in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos. Thanks for watching.